You mentioned you got to gather information, police reports, perhaps medical information, things like that. That seems to me, and we talked before about it being frustrating, the length of time that some of that adds. That's got to add some fair amount of time to the process, doesn't it?
It does. We've been working very recently in training our victim assistance providers, the people that are working out in the field, in the community-based agencies, in the DA's offices, with our process so that they understand what we need so that they can help the victim to gather those documents immediately and get them to us as soon as possible. But the typical turnaround time for personal injury and death claim is somewhere in the high 60s, between 60 and 70 days, which is pretty good considering all that back and forth with paperwork that goes between us and the claimant, us and the victim assistance provider, us and the provider of medical services, and the investigation and pulling all of that together and looking at the statute to see what applies and what doesn't apply given the person's age or circumstances or the claim that they're making. So that's about average, about 70 days average for personal injury and death. And then, because of our computerization, we've seen the time for an essential personal property claim, which are probably the simplest claims because they're just for property. The amount, as I said, the maximum is $500. So those are very simple claims, relatively speaking, much less documentation than you would need in a personal injury case, for example. Those claims are taking less than 30 days now. They used to take about 60, now they're taking less than 30.
And if there's a more immediate need on the part of the victim, what do you do?
Thankfully, we have emergency wards. The emergency award function has been in existence for many years, but recently the amount was increased to $2,500. So, for example, in the case of a homicide, where a family doesn't have the means to bury their loved one, they can get up to $2,500 right away to give to the funeral home to start that process. In the case of a rape victim who needs emergency prophylactic medication to keep them from hopefully contracting HIV. That medication is essential, and we will pay that on an emergency basis, again, up to $2,500.
And how quick a turnaround is that?
Days. Really? You can get it the same day. Depending on where you are when you're making the award, we have people walking into our Brooklyn office every day. Every day. And we have an advocate on hand at the Brooklyn office whose job is to meet with the claimant, get the details. If it's, in many cases, out of our New York office, we're seeing these being made for burial expenses. So then she has to contact the funeral home, get the signed contract that establishes that this person is the one who has the contracting relationship with the funeral home. Then she has to contact the investigator on the case to ensure that the victim was an innocent victim. Once she has that, she's on the phone to a board member trying to get approval for payment of that emergency award, and the board member can sign the check that day in the office, and the person can walk out with the check that day.
And what about living on the east side of the middle of nowhere? Well,
in many cases, we have victim assistance providers. As I said, there are almost 200 of them in just about every part of the state or in close proximity. That person might assist you by faxing in the information, doing this over the phone, and we can overnight a check to the provider or the victim.
What types of rights do crime victims have?
You'd be surprised how many rights crime victims have. I have this little card here, and it's covered on the front and back. This is contained within Article 23 of Executive Law, but it's also in other places. The Office of Court Administration and judges also have almost a mirror of these rights, so that the judges are aware, by virtue of their rules, what the rights of crime victims are. But they run the gambit. And at the basic foundation of it is the right to be notified when something essential is going on in your case. The right to be notified, for example, when a bail is being considered or when a plea is being considered. Not that they have the final say on exactly what's going to happen, but that they have the right to be consulted, to be made aware, particularly if it's a violent crime and they're known to each other, the defendant and the victim. The victim would want to know if the defendant was about to be released on bail and has the right to be notified. Yeah. And of course, as I said, plea negotiations, certainly a trial. You can't have a trial without the victim. So they not only are they the victim, they're your key witness. So they have the right to be notified at all those key stages. They also have other rights that are less known, such as the right to be protected in the sense of when things are going on in the courthouse. They have the right to actually be kept in a separate area if they wish, for their own safety and comfort until such time as they're needed in court. For child victims, things like closed captioning, not closed captioning, but videoing the child outside of the courtroom, outside of the presence of the defendant, is something that the child victim has a right to. So there are all kinds of rights attaching to the victim that enable them and empower them through the process, because criminal justice process can be daunting for practitioners and victims as well. So we try to make it as easy
Where
as
do
possible.
you get that?
This is available to anyone by calling the Crime Victims Board or by email or addressing our website. And our website is www.cvb.state.ny.us. If you go to our website, you can get the application, you can get brochures, you can get information about local victim assistance providers. As I said, there's almost 200 of them. You put your zip code in, and you'll find out where all the providers are within a radius of 5, 10, 25, or 50 miles of where you are at the time.
I am the victim of a crime. I make an application for some compensation. I'm denied. Do I have the right to appeal?
Yes, you do. All those requests for appeals come addressed to me as the chairperson. We give the board members the authority and the right to take a second look at that claim. Sometimes there's just a document that isn't there, a police report that has a supplement that we're not aware of. For example, one of our requirements, in addition to making a police report within 7 days of the crime, and that's waivable under certain reasonable conditions. But in addition to making the police report, we also require that the victim cooperate with authorities. So sometimes the initial police report might not indicate a level of cooperation, but we'd find that in gathering a supplemental police report or talking to the district attorney involved in the case, that the person did actually cooperate with a prosecution in a case where they've reported a crime. So sometimes following up on that documentation is the kind of thing that a board member has the right to do that helps the person along.
Okay, and if it's denied again, and I just have a moment for the answer to this, if it's denied again, do I have a further right to appeal? Is there recourse to the courts?
Well, what we do then is, if the board member is comfortable with their decision, that they've made the right decision, then it goes to a panel of 3 other board members to review the claim, to review the reason that it was denied, and then we would either agree with the board member's decision, or we could modify it, or we could reverse it. And then if the person still isn't satisfied with the decision of the 3 appeal board members, then they have the right to an Article 78 proceeding, which is a proceeding against any governmental agency.
All right, good. Time has zipped on by. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Tina Standford, the chairwoman of the New York State Crime